Scott Inghams with Northwest Biological Consulting. I've been involved in this project as far as doing wetland work and plant work on Mount Ashland ski area and expansion area since 1999. And recently I've become more interested in, what's going to happen up there. 12 years ago is a long time. And it's interesting what's happened in a 12-year period as far as presenting information that was either not utilized by the Forest Service or utilized in such a way that didn't really require all the details. And so I'm just here to support the information that we were all part of. George is part of the team, Bill was part of the team, Steve wasn't at that time, and a few other people that aren't here. And I want to just express my concerns about primarily the wetland issues within the expansion area.
I'm George Badura. I'm forest soil scientist. I started out working for the Soil Conservation Service, and then it switched over to the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and I came to work for the Forest Service, and I worked over pretty much throughout the western U.S., Idaho, Oregon, California, Nevada. And I also, when I moved to the rogue forest here in about 1971, I led the Forest Soil Resource Inventory for the Rogue River National Forest. I have been working on this project since the beginning. I retired in '98, and soon thereafter I worked with both Scott and Billy on looking at some of the areas in the original ski development. And what I've got to present today is some of the issues that I identified for this area.
Let me introduce myself. I'm Steve Ellen. I'm a retired geologist, U.S. Geological Survey. I do not live in Ashland, and I'm unfamiliar, except for a few letters to the editor, with this issue. But I have studied storms and their landslide consequences over the western U.S. for my career, and I think I can offer some perspective on this area.
Yes, B.G. Hicks, Bill Hicks, engineering geologist. Left the Forest Service in about '92, and been working privately on soil stability work for many people. And not the work that I did with Scott and George and some engineers was just on that lowermost end. We'll see in a moment the lowermost end, the crossing down at the base. At the time, it was plenty to do. It wasn't a problem. But now as this thing has developed and I've learned more and I've been working with this stereo 3D imagery, you'll see some of it in a moment with your glasses on. You'll see how powerful it is and how it reveals some important things. One of the most important things it reveals right away, because NOGAMI, State of Oregon Department of Geology, has just remapped this entire basin, and all of southernmost Oregon that they have LiDAR for, have remapped them. And you'll see how they show this expansion area in this new mapping. Yes?
Could we back up just a sec and clarify when the three of you said that you worked on this project back in the 90s, who were you contracted by? Was it the Forest Service?
No, it was the Mount Ashland ski.
Oh, the Mount Ashland Ski Association.
They hired us in 1999 to come up with this wetland delineation and a study of the lower part of where the crossings would occur, which we'll show you later. With that.
I see. So that was in preparation of their EIS that they put together at that point? Or?
I guess you call it very preliminary information, and then from then on, we were out of the picture. Then they wound up hiring other consultants and working with the Forest Service to develop the EIS and so forth.
Okay, thank you.
Part of what we wanted to show you people today was, and the reason we have the stereo imagery is that you can see the watershed really clearly. This isn't the entire watershed, but you can really, far better than you could from an airplane, you can see what we're talking about, how the ski areas relate to the rest of the ground and sort of what the ground's like. Granitic terrain, a terrain underlined by granite or granitic rocks, typically develops really steep slopes and sharp incised drainages. And you can see that style of things here. Too steep to stand on easily, let's put it that way. And you can see, in addition to the steep ground, like in here, you can see a number of drainages on the side hills, right? A number of channels running down to the main streams, which largely in this image have blue along them, the blue being deposits either of landslides or of alluvium or some combination of those materials. The way that granitic terrains typically erode is not so much by running water carrying a single grain of soil down the sides of the hills, but by landslides of two main types. One are called debris slides, and those are shallow landslides that occur on side slopes usually, and take a yard to a few yards deep of soil and start them heading down the hill. And one of the things about the soils in granitic areas that's different from some other areas is that those slides and the materials are such that they can become fluid and flow. Those are called debris flows when the soil is slipped, incorporated enough water to then flow down the hillside and possibly down the channels. The kinds of activities that encourage debris slides, encourage what Bill would call a failure, the slope to release and start moving, are removing support from the base, like if you cut a bank for a road into it, if you make removing support like the roots of trees, and in particular water conditions, if you increase the amounts of water in the soils. And so that's why this kind of landslide almost always occurs either during intense rainfall or during rapid snowmelt events. Okay, now debris slides are one thing, and the one thing I think you can understand is that once, really in a landscape like this, once any sediment gets carried down to a stream channel, and there are plenty of those even on the hillside, you see, it's on its way to Reeder Reservoir. Maybe not this year, but it'll get there because it'll be in the channel, and then running water at least will carry it down. Now, there's another kind of phenomenon that occurs that I just want to mention because it's more dramatic, and that is in debris slide terrain like this, you can get big debris flows that move down the main channels during intense storms. And that they do so and gain material through sort of a snowball effect, where, say, some sediment from a debris slide makes it to the main channel and starts flowing down the channel. Well, in the channel, there's all this saturated material lining the side slopes. And if any of that can be incorporated by that flowing debris, then it's bigger, and then it's easier to get more. And so one of the things you look for in terms of sort of dramatic hazards in a landscape like this is how much sediment is there along the stream channels that's available to be incorporated in a big debris flow. And in this mapping by Dogami, you can see in this purplish color, everything in purplish here is either landslide debris, which would be a loose and trainable material, let's say, or fill, or some combination of those. How likely is any, I think it was your question, maybe, how likely is the development to increase over the natural rate of things? And I think that's really a good question. And I think that's the question here. And I don't have an answer, but if you were to basically just come into this from the outside like me, and you see the existing area here, and the expansion area more or less in this area here, if you were to be asked which one looks more of more concern, a person like me initially would point immediately to this one. This is the Dogami definition of this unit, and to the last line is the important one. And all areas of existing landslide deposits should be considered at risk for further slope movement. Okay, so here's the whole watershed. Lithia Park way down here, the reservoir protecting, in a sense, the city of Ashland from whatever might come in above it, above the reservoir, and the ski areas down here. You see all the sediment, all the blue, the loose available material along the drainages leading downslope from the proposed expansion and from the existing ski area also. You've got vulnerable facilities in the channels, reservoir itself to be filled, and downstream from the reservoir, the water treatment plant. And then the other thing I want to show you is I have not walked in the watershed much, but the little bit I have down here in Lithia Park, there are some beautiful examples of deposits of large debris flows. And you can recognize these because whenever you see a boulder the size of a car, more or less, that did not get there by running water pushing it there. It got there through debris flow because the debris flow is more like a slurry of concrete. It's mostly sediment with enough water in it to mobilize it. And the density of that fluid is almost sufficient to float a block of rock. So you can transport enormous blocks. So huge boulders are sort of a classic evidence of large debris flows. And what we know from walking around the park is that large debris flows in the past have made it all the way down the channel to the duck pond, basically.
Basically, what I'm referring to now is the proposed expansion, not actually, not the existing area. There's quite a bit of difference in soils between the two, but there are some similarities also.
Yeah, we're going to turn it off.
Take a moment to get your eyes adjusted.
Just west of Mount Ashland, which is the top of the mountain here, this drainage here is glaciated terrain near the top of the mountain, and it's a lot of spruce trees, and a lot of wetlands are in this bottom, this blue area in here.
You might point out the boundary of the expansion area.
This is the old,
This,
the
right,
existing area, and the new runs there, roughly there.
yeah. Basically, they'll be cutting trees out along these ski runs. This is a very critical area because it's where they're going to have they're going to do an excavation for a ski lift, which would be coming all the way up the hill. And that's going to have some pretty deep cuts on that slope. And that's where we know we have a lot of groundwater. And then right up near the top here where they're going to be building a lodge of some sort. And that's directly affecting the water coming, or increasing the runoff coming down into this wetland, which is a major source of water for the city of Ashland. It's probably the most water for all the whole watershed that's coming out of there. And that's the concern in this area here, more runoff coming into that whole landslide drainage. I've been involved in sluicing Reeder Reservoir a couple times when I was working for the Forest Service. And we know those things are going to happen every so often. The thing is, we don't want to double them or triple them, you know, and that's one of the things that by ignoring some of these runoff potentials and critical areas could happen. In some of the, what I call the piping holes, which a piping hole is if you're in like sandy soil and you got a head pressure water coming down through the soil, it'll be like start out like a mole hole or something like that, and it just cleans them out, and you end up with little underground channels of water. And some of those would be down 2 feet, and I measured some of those, and you could reach under the bank about 2 feet, you know. But they were relatively, they're like you were saying, they're not stable. They're moving sediment, but they're not overnight. You know, it's a slow process, and so that's the things that if they increase the runoff in these, they could open up the whole piping channels. So there's a lot of activity going on there. Yeah. And the lands below here, which have some of these piping holes, are very critical to increasing in size, and then right at that point, it goes like that. Mm-hmm. And it is really sensitive to accelerated erosion. Okay. Now, that would be, you know, two of the key areas. And what really bothered me as much as anything is a terminal right in there. And it would take an excavation considerably, 10, 20 feet probably, in order to put it in. That'd be like basically cutting off a small river, and it'd be flowing out and then flowing right down into that creek. Whereas right now, it's migrating through the soil at a erodible speed of much less than what it would be.
We did this study in 1999, and we identified jurisdictional wetlands in this zone right here. That's where where you saw earlier slide, we saw that the ski runs were crossing at that point. Apparently, that study was never turned into the Corps of Engineers or Department of State Lands for their concurrence.
It was not?
It was not. In the association in 2003, 2004, they also did a wetland study along with some stream studies in this area. And they did identify jurisdictional wetlands in there that were more or less comparable to our study results. I was not able to determine if they actually submitted that for concurrence by the Army Corps of Engineers or Department of State Lands. I called the Department of State Lands yesterday, and they assured me that if there were jurisdictional wetlands up here, that this particular action would qualify for you need a permit, you need to do compensation, you need to do mitigation, do all kinds of different things. And I was under the understanding that perhaps the Mount Ashland Association thought that, or in this case, the Forest Service has a memorandum of understanding that because if they engage in timber harvest activities, they are not obligated to comply with the Clean Water Act, which is, wetlands and so on and so forth. Well, if you put a ski area in here, that really isn't timber harvest activity. That's a complete change of use, which would be required, and it would be required by the Corps and DSL. In my opinion, they never gave that study results to the appropriate authorities for review and concurrence. So that's something that may be necessary. Yeah.
In regard to taking out of the trees, there will be additional grading and blasting, whether or not that will occur, given the soils.
Well, to take the trees out, I mean, that would be very disturbing to put it at the least. Those Engelmann spruce have a fairly well-defined root system that holds a lot of that soil. A lot of the stability in that zone down here is because of those Engelmann spruce. By taking those trees out for that crossing right there, it's not a very big impact, but it would certainly be an impact. And because it's at such a critical area there that we found out, now this is, we're talking about this dam that George talked about and Steve and Bill. That's a very important part. So it could have significant impact just by taking out even a few trees. Maybe that would be enough to destabilize that whole slope. I don't know.
But that plus building right in that area, building a 10, 20 foot deep base
For that tower.
Yeah.
So the setting that I just want to show you the setting. Here's the setting. You've got a situation with a lot of sediment along the channels ready to be incorporated, evidence that this has happened in the past, and now we're talking about the ski areas. And the problems, by the way, that at least I'm talking about, are water supply problems, filling the reservoir with sediment. I wanted to read one more thing, but this was observations by a gentleman, resident of Ashland, James Moore, a geologist. Has visited the upper Ashland Creek site of the proposed ski lift on several occasions. I have also traversed one of the forks of Ashland Creek from its headwaters to entry into Reeder Reservoir. I was astounded by the large amounts of stored DG, that is, loose granitic sand. Astounded by the large amounts of stored DG along the creek's path, just waiting for a water event to create a debris slides that will eventually end up in Reeder. It is truly a fragile system under the best of conditions.
I'd like to support that because when I walk down below the existing ski run, walking down there, there'd be sediment, little flats in the creek where it break and all that stuff, and there'd be deposits of this sandy material with some vegetation on it that would be anywhere from 10 feet to 15, 20 feet in diameter, just basically waiting for a catastrophic overland flow, yeah. That is really common down, going down through there.
Mostly after the fact, after being there. There's bedrock on one side, bedrock on the other. Right in the middle is the area that George has described to you, that this is like a dam in this channel, in this material.
There are an estimated 200 to 300,000 cubic yards of loose material.
Stored behind this thing. But my point is not that my idea is correct, but there's no study of this. More importantly, it's also beyond that, my idea, my opinion, that the spruce and the water and the things that George and I saw in here, these piping flows underneath this, through this material, is an ecosystem that is contingent on the water flow, the trees, and those materials to keep it stable. You mess with those trees, you mess with stability in that area. The one reason is that all the land stuff that I can focus on, the landslide work, is something, a method that I created for the Forest Service, to use for mapping landslides decades ago, and it's way out of date. It's inappropriate to use it. That's all we're using up here, on these kind of infinite slopes, shallow materials, failures, in my opinion. That the risk is too great. Same thing I said to Forest Service in my responses to the EIS, same thing I said to the City Council in a letter. The risk is too great. Don't take it.